Montana Territory, 1887. The endless prairie stretched beneath a bruised sky, where thunder muttered promises of coming rain. Kirk Thornton guided his weary buckskin gelding across the rolling grasslands, a man who'd learned to read the land like others read books. At 25, his face held the weathered determination of someone who'd already lived several lifetimes on the frontier, though his blue eyes retained a youthful clarity that belied the hardness he cultivated. Kirk's broad shoulders carried the weight of 6 years working cattle drives, bounty hunting, and whatever honest labor would keep him moving. His light stubble framed a jawline that women in frontier towns had admired, though he never stayed long enough for their interest to matter. He preferred the clean simplicity of solitude. No attachments meant no loss, a lesson branded into him by the violence of frontier life. A man's only got himself out here, he often told his horse, Phoenix, the only companion he permitted himself. Trust gets you killed in this country. It was a conviction born of necessity. At 19, he'd watched outlaws murder his trail boss and 2 fellow cowboys over a card game dispute. Since then, Kirk had lived by a simple code. Keep moving, trust no one, form no bonds. The frontier was a place for survival, not sentiment. His Winchester rifle and Colt revolver were more reliable companions than any person could be. Still, in the quiet moments when the campfire burned low and coyotes called across the plains, something hollow echoed in his chest. He told himself it was merely hunger or tiredness, never loneliness, never the absence of something he couldn't name. The first heavy raindrops struck his wide-brimmed hat as dark clouds swallowed the last light. He needed shelter before the storm broke in earnest. Lightning split the sky, illuminating a strange sight in the distance. The outline of a covered wagon, tilted at an odd angle in a shallow ravine. Somebody's having a worse day than us, Phoenix, Kirk muttered, hesitating only briefly before changing course. As he drew closer, the crack of thunder nearly drowned out a sound that stopped him cold, a woman sobbing, carrying on the wind. His instincts screamed to ride on. Other people's troubles weren't his concern. The West was littered with tragedies. He couldn't prevent them all. Yet something in that forlorn crying pierced the armor he'd built around himself. When lightning flashed again, he saw her, a young woman in a rain-soaked blue dress, kneeling beside a broken wagon wheel, her shoulders shaking with desperate sobs. Her dark blonde hair had come loose from its pins, falling in wet tangles down her back. Kirk dismounted cautiously, approaching with his hand near his holster. 6 years of frontier living had taught him that even the most innocent-looking situations could be ambushes. "Ma'am," he called over the intensifying rain. "You need assistance?" She startled, scrambling to her feet and backing against the wagon. Her eyes, wide with fear and reddened from crying, fixed on him warily. She couldn't have been more than 21, with delicate features sharpened by exhaustion and fear. "Stay back," she warned, though her voice trembled. "I have nothing worth stealing." Kirk raised his hand slowly. "I'm not here to rob you, ma'am. Just offering help with that wheel." She studied him with the caution of someone who'd learned frontier lessons the hard way. Finally, necessity outweighed suspicion. "The axle broke when the horses spooked during the storm," she explained, her voice steadier. "I unhitched them, but they ran off." Kirk assessed the situation with a practiced eye. "We can't fix this tonight. Storm's getting worse." He gestured to a cluster of cottonwoods about half a mile distant. "There's better shelter by those trees. We should make camp there until morning." "We?" Her eyes narrowed. "I don't know you, sir." "Kirk Thornton," he replied simply. "And you'd be?" "Rebecca Farrow," she answered after a pause. "Miss Rebecca Farrow. Well, Miss Farrow, you have 2 choices. Stay here with your broken wagon in a lightning storm, or let me help you reach those trees where we might stay dry." He glanced meaningfully at the darkening sky. Frontier doesn't give us many good options sometimes. Another lightning strike illuminated the sky, closer this time. Rebecca flinched, then gathered her resolve. "Very well, Mr. Thornton. But understand that I'm accepting your help, not your authority." A hint of a smile touched Kirk's lips, the first in longer than he could remember. "Wouldn't dream of it, Miss Farrow." As the rain poured down in earnest, Kirk helped her salvage essential supplies from the wagon. When Rebecca pulled a small leather-bound book from a trunk, clutching it protectively inside her coat, he raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Everyone on the frontier carried something they couldn't stand to lose. With Rebecca mounted behind him on Phoenix, one arm reluctantly circling his waist for balance, Kirk felt a strange discomfort that had nothing to do with the physical arrangement. The warmth of another human being, trusting him enough to hold on. It threatened the carefully constructed isolation he'd maintained for years. At the Cottonwood Grove, they found blessed relief from the downpour. Kirk worked efficiently, setting up a small canvas shelter and building a fire despite the wet conditions. His practiced movements spoke of countless nights spent alone in the wilderness. "Where were you headed?" he asked as he handed her a tin cup of hot coffee. Rebecca warmed her hands on the cup, studying him over the rim. "Silver Creek. I have family there. Or at least, I hope I do." "Hope," she sighed, the weight of her journey evident in the slump of her shoulders. "My Aunt Martha. I haven't seen her since I was 12. After my parents died in Chicago last winter, I found letters she'd written them. Silver Creek was the last address." Kirk frowned. "That's a long way to travel on hope, Miss Farrow." "I had little choice," she replied, a flash of defiance in her hazel eyes. Chicago offered nothing but memories and creditors. The frontier seemed to promise something else. "The frontier promises nothing but hard work and harder lessons," Kirk said flatly. "Those who say different are selling something." Rebecca's expression hardened. "I'm not some naive city girl with romantic notions, Mr. Thornton. I've buried both parents, worked as a schoolteacher in conditions you couldn't imagine, and traveled 1,000 miles alone. I'm well acquainted with hardship." Kirk met her gaze and saw something he recognized, the determined resilience of someone who'd faced loss and continued anyway. It unsettled him, this unexpected kinship. "Silver Creek's 3 days' ride from here," he said after a moment. "I know a wheelwright in Tucker's Gulch, about half a day east. We can see about repairs tomorrow." "Thank you," she said, genuine gratitude softening her features. "Though I can't pay much." Kirk shrugged. Wasn't asking for payment. The words surprised him as much as her. That night, as Rebecca slept across the fire from him, Kirk stared into the flames, troubled by the strange turn his solitary journey had taken. One act of decency, and now he felt responsible for this woman's safe passage. It was precisely the kind of entanglement he'd avoided for years. Just to Tucker's Gulch, he promised himself quietly. Then she's on her own again. But as thunder rumbled in the distance and rain pattered on the canvas above, something in Kirk's carefully ordered world had already begun to shift, like earth trembling before a landslide. Morning brought clearing skies and uncomfortable clarity. Rebecca looked younger in daylight, her dark blonde hair neatly pinned again, her travel-worn dress brushed clean. The vulnerability of the previous night had been replaced by composed determination. "I can make my own way to Tucker's Gulch if you'll point the direction," she announced over breakfast. Kirk raised an eyebrow. "On foot, through mountain lion country. I'd rather not impose further." "It's not an imposition," he replied, surprising himself again. "I was heading that way regardless." It was a lie. He'd been bound for Wyoming, but one that felt necessary in the moment. The thought of this woman walking alone across the Montana wilderness stirred something protective he'd thought long dead. As they rode toward Tucker's Gulch, Rebecca gradually revealed pieces of her story. How her father, a respected doctor, had lost everything to gambling debts before pneumonia claimed him. How her mother had followed him to the grave within weeks. How Rebecca had sold their household goods to pay off creditors and buy passage west. "And you?" she asked as Phoenix carried them across a shallow stream. "What brings a man like you to wander alone through Montana territory?" Kirk stiffened. "Nothing worth telling. Everyone has a story, Mr. Thornton. Some stories are better left untold, Miss Farrow." She fell silent, but he felt her curiosity like a physical presence at his back. It had been so long since anyone had cared enough to ask about his past that he'd almost forgotten how to deflect such questions. Tucker's Gulch proved to be little more than a collection of rough buildings serving local ranchers and travelers. The wheelwright, a grizzled old-timer named Silas, examined the wagon wheel Kirk had strapped to Phoenix. "Can fix it, but I'm backed up with work for the Rocking D spread," Silas drawled. 3, for days at earliest." Rebecca's face fell. Kirk felt an unexpected twist in his chest at her disappointment. "What if I help?" he heard himself offer. "I've done smith work before." Silas squinted at him assessingly. "Could cut it to 2 days, maybe." 2 days. Kirk had planned to be gone by sundown. continuing his endless journey to nowhere in particular. Now he was volunteering for blacksmith work to help a woman he barely knew. While Silas and Kirk returned to retrieve her wagon, Rebecca arranged lodging at the town's only boarding house. That evening, as they sat on the boarding house porch watching the sunset paint the distant mountains, Kirk found himself speaking more than he had in months. Wyoming was next, he admitted when she asked again about his travels. Then maybe Colorado. I don't much plan ahead. That sounds lonely, Rebecca observed quietly. Kirk shrugged. Peaceful is what I'd call it. Is peace what you're looking for, Mr. Thornton? The question caught him off guard. Was peace what he sought in his endless wandering? Or was it merely escape? I reckon a man finds what he needs eventually, he answered evasively. What about you? After Silver Creek, what then? Rebecca's fingers absently traced the spine of the leather book she carried everywhere. I hope to teach again. Children need education, especially on the frontier. Noble ambition. Not nobility, she corrected. Necessity. We can't build something lasting out of ignorance and violence. Her words struck a chord Kirk didn't want to acknowledge. He'd spent years convincing himself that the West was no place for building anything lasting, that survival alone was achievement enough. The next morning brought unexpected complications. As Kirk worked alongside Silas repairing the wagon, 3 rough-looking men rode into town, their manners setting off warning signals in Kirk's experienced judgment. Trouble, Silas muttered, confirming Kirk's assessment. The men dismounted outside the saloon, their eyes sweeping the street with predatory interest. One, a tall man with a pockmarked face, spotted Rebecca walking from the general store with a small package. His gaze lingered too long, triggering a protective instinct Kirk thought he'd buried years ago. That evening, Kirk insisted on escorting Rebecca back to the boarding house after dinner at the town's small cafe. Those men at the saloon, he explained when she questioned his vigilance. They're the sort who cause problems. I've handled difficult men before, Rebecca replied, though she accepted his escort nonetheless. Not like these, Kirk said grimly. I know their kind. And what kind is that, Mr. Thornton? She asked, studying his face in the lamplight spilling from the boarding house windows. Kirk hesitated, then decided on honesty. Outlaws. Probably running from something east of here, looking for easy opportunities. Rebecca nodded slowly. Then I'm grateful for your concern. Their eyes met, and for a moment, Kirk felt a connection that transcended the caution he normally maintained. Something in her direct gaze suggested she saw past his carefully constructed barriers. I should return to the livery, he said abruptly, breaking the moment. Promised Silas I'd finish the axle repair tonight. As he walked away, Kirk fought the uncomfortable awareness that Rebecca Farrow was becoming someone whose safety mattered to him. It violated every rule he'd lived by since watching his friends die. Attachment was vulnerability. Vulnerability got you killed on the frontier. Yet when morning came, Kirk found himself lingering at the livery, working with focused precision on Rebecca's wagon, determined to make it sturdier than before. When the pockmarked man sauntered in to inquire about horseshoeing, Kirk's hand instinctively moved closer to his holstered Colt. Fine work, the stranger commented, eyeing the wagon. For the pretty little blonde, I hear. Kirk kept his voice neutral. Just helping a traveler. The man chuckled. Mighty generous. Me and my boys might offer her some assistance too. Kirk straightened, fixing the man with a cold stare. I wouldn't recommend that. Something in his expression must have communicated the danger behind his words. The man raised his hands in mock surrender. No offense meant, friend. Just making conversation. He backed toward the door. Mighty protective for someone who's just helping. After he left, Silas shook his head. That's Jeb Harker. Wanted in Colorado for robbery. His companions ain't much better. Kirk nodded grimly. We need to finish this wagon today. By sunset, the repairs were complete. Kirk found Rebecca at the boarding house, explaining the situation in straightforward terms. We should leave at first light, he concluded. Those men mean trouble. Rebecca's expression tightened with concern. We? You're continuing to Silver Creek. The question hung between them. Kirk had no reason to accompany her further, no obligation beyond the repairs he'd already completed. Logic dictated he resume his solitary journey. Silver Creek's on my way, he said finally, another lie he couldn't explain even to himself. That night, Kirk kept watch from the shadows near the boarding house, his instincts on high alert. Around midnight, his vigilance proved justified when Harker and his companions approached the building, clearly intoxicated and speaking in loud whispers about the schoolteacher upstairs. Kirk stepped from the shadows, his Colt drawn but held low at his side. "Evening, gentlemen," he said quietly. "You seem lost." Harker's hand twitched toward his gun but stopped when he recognized Kirk. "Just looking for company," Harker slurred. "Look elsewhere," Kirk replied, his voice carrying the authority of a man comfortable with violence when necessary. For a tense moment, it seemed Harker might challenge him. Then the outlaw spat in the dirt and gestured for his companions to follow him away. "This ain't over," Harker called back. "Nobody tells Jeb Harker where he can go." Kirk watched until they disappeared into the saloon, then resumed his vigil. For the first time in years, he felt the weight of responsibility for another's safety, and strangely, it didn't feel like the burden he'd expected. Dawn found them already miles from Tucker's Gulch, Rebecca driving her repaired wagon with Kirk riding alongside. He'd insisted on an early, quiet departure, explaining about the confrontation with Harker. "You stood guard all night?" Rebecca asked, her expression a mixture of gratitude and concern. "You must be exhausted." Kirk shrugged. "I've gone longer without sleep." "Why are you helping me, Mr. Thornton?" she asked directly. "You've altered your plans, worked for days on my wagon, and now protected me from outlaws. What do you want in return?" The question caught him off guard with its bluntness. "Nothing," he answered honestly. It was the right thing to do. Rebecca studied him with those perceptive hazel eyes. "Most men I've encountered don't trouble themselves with right unless there's profit in it." "I'm not most men," Kirk replied simply. Something in her expression softened. "No, I don't believe you are." They traveled steadily through the day, making good progress towards Silver Creek. As they prepared camp that evening, a comfortable rhythm developed between them. Kirk tending the horses and fire while Rebecca organized their simple meal. Over dinner, Rebecca opened up further about her life in Chicago, describing her years teaching in a crowded schoolhouse where many children arrived hungry and ill-prepared to learn. "Yet I loved it," she said, her face animated in the firelight. "Watching a child grasp reading or numbers for the first time, there's nothing quite like it." Kirk found himself captivated by her passion. "You speak about teaching the way some speak about religion. Perhaps it is a kind of faith," she acknowledged. "Faith in what people can become with the right guidance and opportunity." "Even out here?" Kirk gestured to the wilderness surrounding them. "The frontier doesn't offer much opportunity beyond survival." Rebecca's expression turned thoughtful. "That's where you're wrong, Mr. Thornton. The frontier offers the greatest opportunity of all, the chance to build something new, something better than what came before." Her words unsettled him, challenging the cynicism he'd cultivated for years. "I've seen little evidence of that," he said finally. Rebecca regarded him across the fire. "What happened to make you so certain the West offers nothing but hardship?" The direct question breached defenses Kirk had maintained for years. Perhaps it was exhaustion from his night watch, or something in her earnest expression that made deception seem pointless. "6 years ago, I was working a cattle drive to Abilene," he began slowly. "We stopped in a town called Bitter Springs. 3 men I considered friends, good men I'd ridden with for months, were shot dead over a card game." Rebecca's expression softened with sympathy, but she remained silent, allowing him to continue. "I was getting supplies when it happened. Came back to find them dead in the saloon. The killer had friends in town. The marshal wouldn't pursue it." His jaw tightened at the memory. "I tracked them myself. 3 men responsible. I found 2. The implication hung in the air between them. "You killed them?" Rebecca asked quietly. Kirk met her gaze steadily. "I did what the law wouldn't." He waited for judgment, for fear to cross her features. Instead, she asked, "And the 3rd man?" "Never found him. A man named Victor Reeves. Sometimes I think I've spent 6 years riding just to keep looking." The admission, one he'd never shared with another living soul, left Kirk feeling strangely vulnerable. He expected Rebecca to withdraw, to see him as the dangerous man he was. Instead, she reached across the fire and briefly touched his hand. "I'm sorry for your loss, Kirk." It was the first time she'd used his given name, and something in that simple intimacy threatened to unravel him completely. "We should get some rest," he said abruptly. "Still 2 days to Silver Creek." That night, as Rebecca slept peacefully, Kirk stared at the stars, unsettled by how easily she'd drawn his story from him. More disturbing was her lack of condemnation. She'd looked at him, really looked at him, and hadn't turned away. It was dangerous, this understanding between them. It made him wish for things a man with blood on his hands had no right to want. The following day brought unexpected difficulty when dark clouds gathered and a late spring storm swept across the plains. They pushed on through driving rain until Rebecca's horses began struggling in the increasingly muddy trail. "There's an abandoned line shack about a mile east," Kirk called over the howling wind. "Used it 2 years back. We should wait out the storm there." The small cabin proved intact, if dusty and cobwebbed. Kirk quickly had a fire blazing in the stone hearth while Rebecca arranged their damp belongings to dry. 2 travelers, 1 cabin, chaperoned only by a storm, Rebecca observed with unexpected humor as she wrung water from her hair. "My Boston schoolmistress would have fainted at the impropriety." Kirk smiled despite himself. "Frontier has its own rules of propriety, Miss Farrow." "I think we're well past Miss Farrow," she replied. "Rebecca will do." As the storm raged outside, they sat before the fire, the forced proximity creating an intimacy neither had anticipated. Rebecca produced her leather book, which Kirk could now see was a journal. "I've written in this every day since leaving Chicago," she explained, running her fingers over the cover. "It helps make sense of things." "What do you write about?" Kirk asked. "Everything. The landscapes, the people, my thoughts." She hesitated. "I've written about you." Kirk raised an eyebrow. "Should I be concerned?" Rebecca smiled. "I wrote that you're a contradiction, a man who claims to want solitude yet goes to extraordinary lengths to help a stranger." Her observation hit uncomfortably close to questions Kirk had been asking himself. "Perhaps I'm not as comfortable with my solitude as I thought," he admitted, surprising himself with his honesty. "Or perhaps you never truly wanted it at all," Rebecca suggested gently. "Maybe it was just easier than risking more loss." Kirk stared into the fire, unable to meet her eyes. No one had ever read him so accurately before. It was terrifying and somehow liberating at once. "What about you?" he asked, turning the conversation. "What does a promising young teacher really want on the frontier?" Rebecca's expression grew distant. "After my parents died, I realized how fragile our connections are, how easily everything familiar can vanish." She traced patterns in the dust beside her. "I suppose I'm looking for something permanent. A place where I belong, where I can build something that might outlast me." "Silver Creek might not be what you're hoping for," Kirk cautioned. "Frontier towns come and go like seasons." "It's not about the town," Rebecca clarified. "It's about finding purpose again. My teaching, perhaps family someday." A slight blush colored her cheeks at this admission. An uncomfortable silence fell between them, filled with unspoken possibilities neither was ready to acknowledge. As the storm continued through the night, they maintained a respectful distance, Kirk insisting on sleeping near the door while Rebecca took the small cot in the corner. Yet something had shifted between them, barriers lowering, truths exchanged that couldn't be unshared. Morning brought clearing skies and an unspoken tension. They resumed their journey towards Silver Creek, each lost in private thoughts about the unexpected connection forming between them. By midday, a more tangible danger emerged. The unmistakable sound of galloping horses approached from behind, and Kirk's experienced ear counted at least 3 riders pushing hard. "Riders coming fast," he warned Rebecca, drawing his rifle from its scabbard. "Get down in the wagon." She complied without question, her expression tense but composed. Kirk positioned himself between the approaching riders and the wagon, his Winchester ready. When Jeb Harker and his 2 companions crested the hill behind them, Kirk's suspicions were confirmed. They must have followed from Tucker's Gulch, determined to settle the score. "Fancy meeting you folks on the trail," Harker called, his false friendliness barely masking malice. "Seems we're headed the same direction." "We prefer traveling alone," Kirk replied evenly, his rifle not quite pointed at them, but ready to be. Harker's smile hardened. "That's not very neighborly. Especially when the lady might need protection. Dangerous country for a woman alone." "She's not alone," Kirk stated, each word carrying deadly intent. The standoff stretched, tension crackling like lightning. Behind him, Kirk heard Rebecca move, and then to his surprise, she stood in the wagon, a small Derringer pistol steady in her hand. "Gentlemen," she called, her voice remarkably calm, "I suggest you continue on your way." Neither of us wishes violence, but we're prepared for it. Harker's expression darkened with anger at being challenged by a woman. You've got spirit, schoolteacher. I like that. What you like doesn't concern me, Rebecca replied coldly. Now move on, or Mr. Thornton will demonstrate why following us was a grave mistake. For a moment, Kirk thought Harker might charge regardless of the consequences. Then the outlaw spat and jerked his head at his companions. Another time, he promised, turning his horse. As they rode away, Kirk caught Harker's parting words, Silver Creek ain't far. We'll be seeing you. When they were gone, Kirk turned to Rebecca with newfound respect. Where were you hiding that derringer? A lady has her secrets, Mr. Thornton, she replied, tucking the small pistol back into a hidden pocket in her skirts. Then, more seriously, will they come back? Kirk nodded grimly. They know where we're headed, and men like that don't take kindly to being challenged, especially by a woman. Then we'd best be prepared, Rebecca said with remarkable composure. How far to Silver Creek? We'll reach it by tomorrow afternoon, Kirk answered, still processing the courage she'd just displayed. But those men will likely get there first. They traveled cautiously through the day, making camp in a defensible position as darkness fell. Kirk insisted on taking first watch, though Rebecca protested she could share the duty. You need your rest for tomorrow, he told her. Silver Creek might not be the reunion you're hoping for. Rebecca nodded soberly. I've considered that. My aunt might be gone, or... She left the thought unfinished. What will you do if she's not there? Kirk asked. Rebecca's expression reflected determination rather than defeat. Continue on. Find another town that needs a teacher. She met his gaze directly. What about you? After Silver Creek, where will you go? The question held more weight than its simple words suggested. Kirk had been asking himself the same thing with increasing frequency. I don't know, he admitted. For the first time in years, I don't have a direction in mind. Something in Rebecca's eyes suggested she understood the significance of this confession. Perhaps you'll find one in Silver Creek, she suggested softly. Kirk said nothing, but as Rebecca settled into her bedroll, his thoughts churned with possibilities he'd never allowed himself to consider. For 6 years, he'd convinced himself that the frontier was no place for lasting connections, that survival meant remaining unattached, unburdened by others. Yet in just a few days, this remarkable woman had begun dismantling beliefs he'd thought unshakable. The next morning brought them within sight of Silver Creek. From the ridge overlooking the settlement, they could see a small but thriving frontier town nestled in a valley alongside a winding stream. It's larger than I expected, Rebecca observed, hope and anxiety mingling in her voice. Kirk nodded. Cattle country around here is good, brings stability. They approached cautiously, Kirk alert for any sign of Harker and his men. The main street revealed a typical frontier settlement: general store, saloon, blacksmith, a small church, and scattered businesses serving the surrounding ranches. Do you know where your aunt lives? Kirk asked as they drew curious glances from townspeople. Rebecca consulted a letter from her pocket. The last address was a millinery shop on Main Street. They found the shop easily enough, a modest establishment with ladies' hats displayed in the window. Kirk helped Rebecca down from the wagon, acutely aware that their journey together was potentially reaching its conclusion. Would you like me to wait outside? He offered. Rebecca hesitated, then shook her head. I'd prefer you with me. The bell above the door announced their entrance. A middle-aged woman with graying hair looked up from her work, her face registering polite curiosity. Good afternoon, she greeted them. Can I help you find something? Rebecca stepped forward. I'm looking for Martha Farrow. The woman's expression shifted subtly. May I ask who's inquiring? Rebecca Farrow, her niece from Chicago. The shopkeeper's hands stilled on the hat she'd been trimming. Martha passed away last winter, dear. Pneumonia took her quickly. Kirk watched the hope drain from Rebecca's face, replaced by the calm resignation of someone accustomed to disappointment. I see, she said quietly. Thank you for telling me. You're Thomas's daughter? The woman asked gently. Rebecca nodded. Martha spoke of you often. I'm Sarah Wilson. I was her friend. The woman's gaze softened with sympathy. She left the shop to me, but... She hesitated, then continued. She left her house and some personal effects to you. Said family might come looking someday. Rebecca's composure faltered momentarily. She remembered me. Of course she did, dear. You were her only family. Sarah came around the counter. The house isn't much, Just a small cottage at the edge of town, but it's yours now. As Sarah prepared to take them to the property, Kirk touched Rebecca's arm gently. I'll see to the horses and wagon. Please stay, Rebecca requested, a vulnerability in her voice he hadn't heard before. I'd like you with me for this. The cottage proved to be a tidy two-room structure with a small garden gone slightly wild with spring growth. Inside, the furnishings were simple but well-maintained, a life preserved in anticipation of an heir who might never arrive. She always believed someone would come, Sarah explained as Rebecca moved through the rooms, touching objects that had belonged to the aunt she barely remembered. Said the Farrows always found their way home eventually. Kirk remained near the door, feeling like an intruder on Rebecca's grief and discovery. This was her journey's end, the destination she'd traveled 1,000 miles to reach. His presence was no longer necessary. As Sarah prepared to leave, she paused beside Kirk. The town council's been looking for a teacher, she mentioned quietly. School's been closed since Christmas, when Mrs. Peterson left to care for her ailing mother. You might mention it to your wife. Before Kirk could correct her assumption, Sarah was gone, leaving him unsettled by the misunderstanding and his reluctance to dispel it. Rebecca emerged from the bedroom, her eyes reddened but composed. She kept my mother's portrait, she said, holding a small framed daguerreotype. They must have reconciled before the end. Kirk nodded, uncertain what comfort to offer. Sarah mentioned they need a teacher in town. Rebecca's expression brightened slightly. Did she? That's providential. An awkward silence fell between them. Their journey was over. The purpose that had united them was fulfilled. Logic dictated that Kirk should take his leave, resume the aimless wandering that had defined his existence for years. I should see about supplies, he said finally. I'll be moving on tomorrow. Rebecca's face fell slightly, though she quickly masked her disappointment. Of course, you've already done far more than I had any right to expect. Kirk stepped outside, his chest tight with emotions he couldn't name. The thought of riding away from Silver Creek, from her, suddenly seemed unbearable. Yet what right did he have to stay? A man with his past had no business entertaining thoughts of permanence, of connection. As evening approached, Kirk returned to the cottage with supplies he'd purchased for Rebecca's pantry. She welcomed him with genuine gratitude, insisting he stay for dinner. It's the least I can do, she said, after everything. They ate by lamplight, the domesticity of the scene both foreign and strangely comfortable to Kirk. Rebecca spoke of her plans to inquire about the teaching position, her natural optimism reasserting itself despite the day's disappointment. It feels like my aunt knew I would come, she reflected, that she prepared this place for me. Some people have faith like that, Kirk observed. Rebecca studied him across the table. And you? What do you have faith in, Kirk Thornton? The question penetrated deeper than she could know. For years, his faith had been limited to his weapons, his horse, his own ability to survive whatever the frontier threw at him. Not much, he admitted, but more than I did a week ago. Her eyes softened with understanding. Will you really leave tomorrow? The question hung between them, loaded with implications neither had voiced. Before Kirk could respond, a sharp knock at the door interrupted them. Kirk moved instantly to his feet, hand dropping to his holstered Colt. Stay back, he warned Rebecca, approaching the door cautiously. The town marshal stood on the porch, his expression grave. Mr. Thornton? Marshal Graves. Need a word. Kirk stepped outside, closing the door partially behind him. Problem, Marshal? Jeb Harker and his boys are at the saloon, Graves said without preamble. They're asking about you and Miss Farrow. Said you robbed them near Tucker's Gulch. Kirk's jaw tightened. That's a lie. They followed us from there, tried to threaten Miss Farrow. The marshal studied him assessingly. Figured as much. Harker's wanted in 2 territories. But he's got friends in town, the Rollins brothers. They're backing his story. So arrest Harker, Kirk suggested bluntly. Marshal Graves shook his head. Can't without proof. And with the Rollins boys involved, it could get messy. Town council doesn't want trouble. Kirk understood the implication. They want us gone. Just you, Graves clarified. Miss Farrow being Martha's niece changes things. She's got standing here. You're just a drifter. The words stung more than Kirk expected. Just a drifter. It was what he'd chosen to be for 6 years, what had kept him alive and free from attachments. Harker won't let it rest, Kirk warned. He's fixated on Miss Farrow. I'll keep an eye on her, the marshal promised. But you should ride out at first light. For her sake as much as yours. After Graves left, Kirk returned inside to find Rebecca waiting anxiously. He explained the situation in straightforward terms, watching her face carefully. So you have to leave, she concluded, her voice steady despite the distress in her eyes. It would be safer for you. Kirk agreed reluctantly. Rebecca shook her head firmly. No. Harker followed us here because of me. If you leave, he'll simply turn his attention directly to me. The marshal cannot watch me constantly, she interrupted. And we both know what kind of man Harker is. He doesn't respect law. Kirk couldn't argue with her assessment. The thought of leaving her vulnerable to Harker's predations was intolerable. There's another option, Rebecca continued, her voice growing more determined. We face him together. Kirk stared at her in disbelief. That's not an option. These men are killers. And you've faced killers before, she countered. I'm not suggesting violence, Kirk. But Harker's power comes from intimidation. If we stand firm, publicly, with the town watching. It's too dangerous, Kirk insisted, though part of him admired her courage. Rebecca stepped closer, her hazel eyes fixed on his. For 6 years, you've been running from connections, from putting down roots. You told yourself it was safer, but was it? Or were you just afraid? Her words struck with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel, exposing truths Kirk had buried beneath years of wandering. I'm not afraid of Harker, he stated firmly. I know, Rebecca replied softly. You're afraid of what comes after. Of staying. The silence between them vibrated with unspoken possibilities. Kirk looked around the small cottage, a home waiting to be truly inhabited, a future waiting to be claimed. What are you suggesting? He asked finally. Stay, she said simply. Not just until Harker is dealt with. Stay in Silver Creek. The request, so straightforward, so profound in its implications, left Kirk momentarily speechless. 6 years of purposeful detachment challenged by a single word. Before he could respond, a commotion outside drew their attention. Kirk moved quickly to the window, pulling back the curtain to see flames rising from the small stable behind the cottage. Fire, he shouted, grabbing his gun belt. Get water. They rushed outside to find the stable fully ablaze, the dry wood catching quickly. A bucket brigade formed as neighbors noticed the flames, but Kirk's attention was drawn to 3 mounted figures watching from the darkness beyond the property. Harker's voice carried clearly. Just a warning, Thornton. Next time it's the house. As the townspeople fought the fire, Kirk made a decision. This had to end, not with him running, not with Rebecca vulnerable, but with a decisive confrontation. Stay with Sarah tonight, he instructed Rebecca as the fire was finally brought under control. I'm going to settle this. Rebecca gripped his arm. Not alone. This isn't your fight. It became my fight when they targeted my home, she countered fiercely. We do this together or not at all. Kirk recognized the determination in her expression, the same resolve that had carried her 1,000 miles across the frontier on little more than hope. She wouldn't be left behind, wouldn't be protected from this confrontation. Together, he agreed finally. But we do this my way. Morning found them in Marshal Graves' office, presenting a united front as Kirk outlined his plan. The marshal listened skeptically. You're asking for official sanction to confront known outlaws? Graves summarized. I'm asking you to uphold the law, Kirk corrected. Harker committed arson last night. We have witnesses. Witnesses who didn't see faces, Graves countered. Rebecca stepped forward. Marshal, I intend to remain in Silver Creek. I hope to become your schoolteacher. But I cannot build a life here if the law won't protect law-abiding citizens. Her direct appeal seemed to reach Graves in a way Kirk's arguments hadn't. What exactly are you proposing? The marshal asked reluctantly. A public confrontation, Kirk explained. On your terms, under your authority. Harker thinks intimidation will drive us out. Let's show him and the town that he's wrong. After further discussion, Graves grudgingly agreed to a plan that would force Harker's hand without unnecessary bloodshed. By noon, word had spread through Silver Creek that the marshal was calling a town meeting regarding recent disturbances. The meeting, deliberately scheduled in the open area before the church, drew nearly every resident of Silver Creek. Kirk stood beside Rebecca on the church steps, acutely aware of the curious and sometimes suspicious glances directed their way. Marshal Graves addressed the gathering with the directness of a frontier lawman. We have trouble brewing. Last night, property belonging to Martha Farrow's niece was set ablaze. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Graves continued. Some of you have been listening to Jeb Harker's claims against Mr. Thornton and Miss Farrow. What you may not know is that Harker is wanted for robbery and murder in Colorado territory. This revelation caused a stir, particularly among the Rollins brothers, who exchanged uneasy glances. I've received confirmation by telegraph, Graves added, producing a paper from his pocket. There's a $500 reward for Harker's capture. From his position on the steps, Kirk spotted Harker and his companions at the edge of the crowd, their expressions darkening as they realized their lies were being publicly exposed. Graves turned to Kirk and Rebecca. Miss Farrow, as Martha's heir and a prospective citizen of our town, perhaps you'd like to address these accusations directly. Rebecca stepped forward, her posture straight and dignified despite the tension of the moment. I came to Silver Creek seeking family and a new beginning, she began, her clear voice carrying across the hushed gathering. Instead, I found threats and intimidation from men who mistake frontier freedom for lawlessness. Her gaze swept the crowd, settling briefly on Harker. I intend to stay in Silver Creek. I hope to reopen your school and contribute to this community. Mr. Thornton has been my protector on this journey, nothing more and nothing less. The accusations against us are fabrications by men who thought a lone woman would be easy prey. Kirk watched with undisguised admiration as she commanded the attention of every person present. This was the teacher in her, the natural authority that needed no weapon beyond conviction and clarity. Well said, Miss Farrow, Marshal Graves acknowledged. Now, Jeb Harker, step forward and face these charges properly. A tense silence fell as all eyes turned to Harker. For a moment, it seemed he might comply with the marshal's demand. Then, with the unpredictability of a cornered predator, Harker drew his pistol. This is a setup, he shouted, firing toward the church steps. The shot went wide, but chaos erupted instantly. Kirk pushed Rebecca behind a pillar, drawing his Colt in the same motion. Citizens scattered for cover as Marshal Graves returned fire. Harker's companions joined the fight, shooting from horseback as they attempted to create an escape route. The Rollins brothers, seeing which way the wind was blowing, prudently took cover rather than supporting Harker. Kirk's experienced eye assessed the situation in seconds. Harker was moving toward the alley beside the general store, using the panicked crowd as cover. With cold precision born of years on the frontier, Kirk circled behind the church, emerging on the far side of the street with a clear line of sight. Harker, he called, stopping the outlaw in his tracks. Drop the gun. Harker spun, firing wildly. Kirk's return shot was deliberate and final, catching the outlaw in the chest. Harker collapsed in the dusty street as his companions, seeing their leader fall, quickly surrendered to Marshal Graves and several armed townsmen. In the sudden silence that followed, Kirk holstered his weapon and moved quickly back to the church steps, where Rebecca emerged from cover, shaken but unhurt. Are you all right? He asked urgently, checking her for injuries. I'm fine, she assured him, her hands gripping his arms for stability. You? Never better, Kirk replied, the truth of it surprising him. Despite the violence just ended, he felt more certain, more present than he had in years. As the town absorbed what had happened, Marshal Graves approached them. Clean shooting, Thornton. Saved us all a lot of trouble. He shook his head ruefully. Reckon I was wrong about you being the problem. In the aftermath, the citizens of Silver Creek rallied around Rebecca with newfound respect. Sarah Wilson organized help to repair the fire damage, while the town council officially offered Rebecca the teaching position. They want the school reopened within the month, she told Kirk that evening as they sat on the porch of her cottage, watching the sunset paint the western sky. The children have fallen behind without instruction. Kirk nodded, acutely aware that the time for decisions had arrived. With Harker dead and his companions headed for territorial prison, the immediate danger was past. Logic dictated that he should move on, continue the solitary journey that had defined his existence. Yet the thought of riding away from Silver Creek, from her, filled him with a hollow dread he couldn't ignore. What will you do now? Rebecca asked softly, the question hanging between them heavy with unspoken possibilities. Kirk took a deep breath. For 6 years, I've been running. Told myself I was looking for something, justice, peace, a man named Victor Reeves. He looked out at the small town settling into evening routines. But maybe I was just afraid to stop. Rebecca's hand found his on the porch railing, her touch grounding him in the present moment. And now I'm tired of running, Kirk admitted. Silver Creek seems like a good place to stop. Hope bloomed in Rebecca's expression. The marshal mentioned they need a deputy. Someone who knows the country and can handle trouble. Kirk raised an eyebrow. Been making plans for me, Miss Farrow? Merely noting opportunities, Mr. Thornton, she replied with a smile that transformed her already beautiful face into something radiant. As darkness settled over the frontier town, Kirk made his decision, not from fear or obligation, but from the recognition of something true and valuable he'd nearly ridden past. I came across you crying in the rain, he said softly, turning to face her fully. Never expected you'd change everything. Rebecca's eyes shimmered in the fading light. For better, I hope? For better, Kirk confirmed. Taking her hands in his, he spoke the words that had been forming in his heart since that stormy night on the prairie. Your journey brought you home to Silver Creek. But I think my journey ends with you, Rebecca. She stepped closer, her response clear in her eyes before she spoke it aloud. Then stay, Kirk Thornton. Build something with me that might outlast us both. As Kirk drew her gently into his arms, the last of his defenses fell away. The frontier had taught him that survival sometimes meant standing alone. Rebecca had shown him that truly living meant finding someone worth standing beside. Their kiss, tender and filled with promise, sealed a covenant stronger than any Kirk had known before. Not a wanderer's temporary shelter, but a home being built on the foundation of shared courage and newfound faith. In the months that followed, Silver Creek witnessed the blooming of what had begun on a rain-soaked prairie trail. Kirk accepted the deputy position, his fairness and frontier experience quickly earning the town's respect. Rebecca reopened the school, her classroom becoming a center of community pride. By Christmas, their wedding in Silver Creek's small church surprised no one who had watched their story unfold. As snow fell softly outside, they exchanged vows before a community that had become their own. Kirk Thornton, who had once believed the frontier offered nothing but hardship and isolation, found himself surrounded by neighbors, holding hands with a woman who had taught him that even in the wildest country, love could take root and flourish. And when spring came again to Montana territory, they stood together on the porch of their expanded cottage, watching new life emerge across the landscape they now called home. Two journeys merged into one, neither ending, but rather truly beginning.